Hi, Larissa. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hi, everybody. Welcome. It is a beautiful day here in LA, and I hope it's beautiful wherever you may be joining us from. I just want to say at the outset, I'm really honored and happy to be part of CSCLA's mission. They do such wonderful work, and so it's great just to be part of it for part of a day. So thank you all for showing up and making it possible, right, for all of us to come together and learn how to better adjust to a cancer diagnosis and the cancer journey, cancer treatment journey, in a way that will serve you in the long run. That's what the topic of our talk is today. So let me share my screen. I'm going to try to save time at the end for questions. Feel free to enter them anytime though, okay? And I'll do my best to get to as many of them as possible. So we have a lot to get through today. And so let's just start with who this presentation is for. So really, this is for anyone in any phase of treatment, facing any stage of cancer, okay? And importantly, people who experience the diagnosis and their treatment journey as disruptive in some way in their life. Now, for those of you who do feel that way, it might seem sort of elementary that you would, but there are people who try to sort of power their way through their treatment journey and downplay the significance of it to their life, and that's their choice, and that's fine. What we'll be talking about today, though, is how to metabolize the impact of a diagnosis. We actually want to be able to experience some form of disruption to work with the kinds of topics that we're covering today. So that includes, if you feel scared or stuck or confused or accepting or defiant or whatever it may be, something that you're accepting of the fact that this has been a disruption in your life and that you're aware that you're having feelings around it, okay? So the premise that we're working with then is that when adversity strikes, like a major diagnosis, that it kind of pulls the rug out from under us and it throws everything up in the air, everything we thought was certain or that we were counting on. And so that this actually provides an opportunity for us, as uncomfortable and anxiety provoking as it may be, that it also provides an opportunity to allow those pieces to come back down and settle into a shape and a form that suits you better, suits the wisest part of you better than perhaps they did before the event. And then from there, sort of looking over the horizon and being able to discover what comes next that you didn't foresee, but that you'll discover anyway. And something that, as I say, will kind of suit your wisest self better than what you had before, hopefully. So just quickly, who I am. Larissa gave me a great introduction, but just briefly, I'm Jim Hjort. That's how that's pronounced, Hjort, like New York, but with a T at the end. So I'm a personal development coach. And also, when I'm wearing a different hat, I'm a psychotherapist, a licensed clinical social worker to be exact. And I'm a mindfulness meditation teacher. Larissa mentioned I'm certified through UCLA's Mindful Awareness Research Center. I've been practicing myself for over 25 years and teaching for 12 or 13. I conduct hypnosis with people and a variety of other techniques and interventions that work with the mind-body connection in many ways. And overall, I tend to scour the research for the latest developments in science of neurobiology, psychology, sociology, social psychology, trying to find the latest tidbits that are sort of coming across the transom from academia, and then how to synthesize those in a way that we can use in our everyday life for peak functioning and satisfaction. Because as it happens, you can't really have one without the other. So I want to kick this off right away with sort of doing away with a sacred cow that we find often in this space. A myth that we hear all the time that plays on our fear and robs us of joy. And it's something that we hear a lot in contexts of people grappling with adversity, but that's not the only time we hear it. And the myth is something like this, that resilience is everything, okay? And we hear this messaging everywhere, from TED Talks to books. And it's in the before times, before COVID. The last professional event I attended before the pandemic broke out was actually a gathering of psychotherapists. And it was a room of maybe 40 or 50 of us. And the question was asked, what do you try to achieve with your clients when you're working with them in therapy? And I was counting, I paid attention to this. About 75% of the room used the word resilience in their answer. And I was a little bit blown away by that. Why? Okay, is it because I think that being strong in the face of adversity is a bad thing? No, it's not that at all. It's a valuable and necessary thing. It's because what we've come to realize in the past handful of years is that resilience and growth are inversely related, okay? Which means that left to its own devices, our brain tends to pick one or the other, okay? To be strong in the face of adversity or to achieve growth after some sort of disruptive event. But it tends to pick one and not both, okay? And if you're wondering why that might be, we can start, and maybe you can find a clue just looking at the definition of resilience, okay? To maintain or quickly regain the level of functioning you had before the event. I wonder if you can see any potential problems with that. Let's take a closer look. Let's say that this is the trajectory of your life. Okay, these are the ups and downs of your life that we all have. Notice how it looks a little bit like an EKG, right? A little bit like a heartbeat. So this is, the ups and downs that we all experience. There's no such thing as a straight, flat line for any period of time. And if you zoom in on a part that looks like it's straight, you'll find even smaller variations, okay? Well, so with the model of resilience, let's say that you experience where the arrow is here. Yeah, let's see if my pointer is working. Okay, here's my pointer. Okay, so let's say here is where you receive your cancer diagnosis, okay? And things were going well, and then after that, you weren't feeling so great, okay? So this represents a low point in your life, at least in terms of this segment of your life, okay? Now, what's notable about this spot here in the circle is that everything beyond that is your future. So of course you can't know what your future is, but from this space, you might have an idea of where you're headed. But note that from down here, you can't see up here, right? There's no line of sight, okay? But if you're shooting for resilience and you want to regain the level of functioning or fulfillment or satisfaction that you had before the event, then what you're doing is you're trying to get back to where that arrow is, okay? And so now you've imposed this ceiling, if you will. You've limited where you've set your sights, and more tragically, you've also cut off the possibility of growth that you did have, but that you weren't even aware of yet, okay? Then the next thing happens. What do? We try to regain the level of functioning before we had that event. And see, we're sort of averaging ourselves down. And if we really seize this idea of resilience as the end all be all, And we want to maintain the level of functioning we have and not even budge at all. Like the people I mentioned at the beginning of this talk who, really do their best to power through their treatment journey and not be affected by it. Okay. Well, then you're bringing the floor up to meet you too. And so perhaps you can see the problem here that over time, you're averaging yourself into what is effectively a flat line. And that's kind of a gray existence, really, when your natural heartbeat looks like this crazy, wild life that we all have, right? Of riding these ups and downs and seeing what comes next and doing our best to make the best of it. So hopefully that is clear to you. So then a cancer diagnosis, and by the way, this applies to major adverse life events of all kinds, but we're talking about cancer today. And so what it does, on the one hand, is it pulls that rug out from under us. It throws everything we thought we knew into disarray and triggers that reptilian brain that we all have to think that we're thrust into the unknown, okay? And it triggers a primitive response that spikes our worry and anxiety. And on the other hand, though, it allows the loose bits that the trappings of the life we had before to fall away, like ones that maybe weren't all that important to us, right? Maybe that ones that weren't all that central to our identity. It shakes them loose, allows them to fall away. And as you set off on this new path that you hadn't anticipated, you're kind of forced to derive a new sense of identity, to reappraise your path, right? And determine what is next for you and what's important to you. So it thrusts you into a growth mode that you might not otherwise have gotten into. And that's where the opportunity may be found. So is there a way to have it both ways is the question, right? Because we don't want to just collapse into a heap, right, when we receive a diagnosis or something bad happens to us. But we also want to enjoy all the potential for growth that is available to us at those times. So I call this splitting the difference and having it both ways, augmented resilience. And this is what I work with people to try to achieve. Okay? Can I have your cake and eat it too? And so this is then what is the foundation of what I'm calling the cancer comeback today. So I want to walk you through 3 steps, 3 basic steps that will get you started on a cancer comeback and developing this augmented resilience. Okay. So here they are: establish safety, find direction, and create a future. So in step 1, we're establishing a sense of safety, which requires changing our relationship to fear. Okay. So going back to this idea of the short-term primitive reactions that are triggered when we're facing the unknown, they map pretty well to the fight, flight, and freeze responses. Rash decision might be, having a quick temper, having an argument with someone over something that you might not otherwise have. Or I knew someone who had an impulse to quit their job because they felt like everything was changing anyway, so I might as well change my career at the same time, which is great, but they hadn't thought that decision out, and so it was a rash decision. Or people that pick up and move across the country, with no plan. So rash decision making like that. Or alternatively, sometimes people turn inward, this kind of curling up that is a bit like circling the wagons, maybe, or maybe coming into closer contact with something inside of them that they can feel connected with. Maybe one of the few things that feels stable in an unstable time. Or this catastrophizing and tunnel vision that we tend to do when we're facing adversity, that it looms largest in our awareness. And so these are all perfectly natural responses, and we evolved to have them for our survival. Uh, so I think this is an important point to make, that we're not, I'm certainly not trying to say that there is a part of us that we need to get rid of, or impulses that we need to get rid of, and instead have these other ones. It's very important that we have these protective responses. It's just that since the limbic system, the primitive part of our brain that is most concerned with our survival, it's so powerful. It's ancient and powerful, and it tends to consume the lion's share of our bandwidth when given a chance. Which is why, left to its own devices, we tend not to experience post-traumatic growth. We tend to want to fight and pursue one of these short-term oriented responses to threat, as opposed to what we're talking about today. So just to be clear, it's really important, I think, to approach both parts of yourself, the short-term oriented reactive part and the long-term oriented part that's concerned with your fulfillment and long-term joy and happiness, as both being conducive to your well-being. They're both looking out for you, just in very different ways. That's all. Okay, so we're just trying to emphasize one and bring one more to the fore rather than have it remain in the background where it tends to be. So the antidote then is, I'm going to give you a couple tools here. So one of them is mindfulness meditation, which maybe you saw this coming because I told you that I'm a meditation practitioner and teacher. If you're not familiar with mindfulness, then I can sum it up in 3 keywords. It's the practice of cultivating awareness, curiosity, and acceptance of your unfolding moment-to-moment experience of life. Okay, so just being present with what's coming up for you. Now, why would this be helpful? Well, for one thing, when you're present and sort of in a childlike way, curious about what's coming up in each of your present moments of life and accepting of them just as they are, well then, by definition, you're becoming more friendly with the process of change, the inevitable process of change that causes those ups and downs to come our way, right? Our heartbeat, the heartbeat of life. We're befriending the process of change rather than resisting it. We're also redirecting the bandwidth of our brain from that limbic system up here toward the upper part of the brain, the higher order brain, and specifically the prefrontal cortex, which is, they call that the CEO of the brain. To the parts of the brain that allow us to think abstractly, to ponder what our hopes and dreams are, to feel let down, to feel disappointed, to feel worried, to feel joy, to feel gratification, to feel hope, all the things that make us human. It's allowing us to redirect our energy to that part of the brain. And that part of the brain tends to think in the long term. Okay. Importantly, just because I'm using the word acceptance doesn't mean that we need to like the way things are. Of course, we're not going to like receiving a cancer diagnosis, and right, or any of the downturns in our life EKG. But there's a difference between liking the content and accepting the change, and accepting that right now, in this one particular moment, this is the way things are. And it's sort of in that acceptance and sort of letting go of the need to push away aspects of our reality that we can actually come into a greater sense of ease with them and suffer less about the bad times. And conversely, when times are better, having a more open relationship to them that allows us to more fully experience joy without the fear that it's going to leave us. But we can fully enjoy it in that present moment, just as it is. And by the same token, just because we're accepting doesn't mean we're accepting that this is the way it's going to feel forever or be forever, right? We're accepting that this will change. So here's a couple of resources for you. Excuse me. This is the website for MARC, the UCLA Mindful Awareness Research Center. On this particular page, they've got their guided meditations that range from, I think, 7 to 15 minutes. So if you're new to mindfulness, those would be a good place to start, because sometimes people you have trouble meditating for longer periods of time at first. So they have nice short ones that you can experiment with. Mindful Magazine has a variety as well. As far as apps on your phone, there's a few. There's Calm, there's Headspace. Insight Timer is the one I recommend because it's the one I use. They have a great selection of guided meditations. I would encourage you to select a mindfulness meditation rather than any of the infinite number of other kinds of meditation, because mindfulness has a great deal of scientific evidence supporting its efficacy in stress and anxiety reduction, among many other physical and psychological health benefits. So that's what I would recommend. Insight Timer, look for the mindfulness meditations. And also, if at any point you would like to experiment with meditating without guidance, just on your own, Insight Timer also allows you to customize your beginning bells and ending bells, and you can have bells chime in the middle of your meditation if you'd like. So it's kind of fun to play with that and create a meditation experience that works well for you. And last but not least, you can feel free to check out my site where I've got some guided meditations as well. So mindfulness meditations and a kindness and compassion meditation that touches on compassion for others as well as self-compassion. And this comes up a lot in my work with people. And so I'd recommend giving that one a shot too. It's a little bit longer though, 40 minutes, I think. Okay, so that's one tool. Excuse me. The second tool is what we'll use to clear away the dust, as I call it. So what is dust? It's what I call discouraging, unreliable self-talk. It's important to understand that we don't need to believe everything we think, even though we do a lot of the time. It's almost as if we have the thought, it must be true. Like it sort of sneaks in under the radar as fact, right? When really it's an electrochemical action taking place in the brain that isn't necessarily grounded in reality. There's a reason for its content, but it may not accurately reflect reality or ourselves for that matter. And so a good way to identify dust is if you have a thought or you find yourself feeling discouraged, depressed, ashamed, kicking yourself, regretful. Okay, any kind of thought or series of thoughts that puts you into a space of being down or negative in that way means you're probably in a dust storm. Okay, and so the reason why I mention this after mindfulness is because once you start to develop mindfulness, you'll be better able to catch these thoughts as they emerge and identify them for what they are. And when you do that, then I'd like to suggest that you start keeping a daily list of them and quote them exactly, direct quotes of these thoughts as if they're an external voice. Okay, just get them down on paper. Getting them down on paper can help depower them because you're acknowledging the concern that they're trying to raise. And also, it's useful for the tool that I'm about to share with you, which involves putting this thought on trial and looking at the evidence for and against it, and then making a wise ruling, using the wisest part of yourself to look at both sets of evidence, and then come away with a balanced judgment based on the evidence. Okay. If you've done any therapy involving CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, then some of these concepts may seem familiar to you. I'm going to give you an example. I worked with a client not long ago who she had been on a real tear at work. She was just on the cusp of getting a promotion to this new position that had um, a lot more responsibility when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so, she took some time off for treatment. And so we were working together, and she identified this piece of dust that kept coming up for her. I'll never be able to get my life back on track. Okay, so let me show you what she came up with in working through this. I've changed some of the details here, okay? But the evidence for this came at the worst time, okay? I'm missing milestones. She had been feeling bad after treatment at one time and had to miss her daughter's graduation from college. I didn't plan for this. On the other hand, what's the evidence against? Well, my path up to this point included crises, okay? And clearly she had gotten her life back on track because she arrived here at this present moment. Oops. Treatment has been going well, and I haven't fundamentally changed, right? This is an issue with my physical body, no more, no less. What's interesting about this milestones evidence for is there's catastrophizing that worked its way into this evidence. So I'm missing milestones. Well, the milestone that's being referred to, like I said, is her daughter's graduation. It was one milestone. Okay, it was one milestone, not two or three. But dust, right? The discouraging, unreliable self-talk, that inner critic, it tends to exaggerate. It tends to have an axe to grind. Okay. It calls it milestones. It's exaggerating. It's not telling the truth. It's not telling the whole truth. Okay. So, another kind of hack for how to identify dust is keep an ear out for if you ever hear your thoughts, including the word always or never, or should, especially should, always, or never. These are kind of hallmarks of that inner critic, the voice of dust. Okay. Because like I said, it tends to think in black and white, tends to have an axe to grind, it tends to be judgmental. So keep an eye out for those trigger words, and that can help you identify these two. So now I'm going to, on the next slide, I have the wise judgment. But before I show it to you, it's a lot of words, okay? And I don't want you to get caught up in reading. What I'd like to offer here now is I'd like to read it to you. And so if you're comfortable with it, allow your eyes to close. And first I'm going to read the dust statement, and then I'm going to read the wise judgment. And I'd like you to feel inside your body how different they feel when you hear them, okay? So allow your eyes to close if you're comfortable with that. And we're starting with this thought. I'll never be able to get my life back on track. Okay? Just notice how that sits with you. And now notice how this feels. I was diagnosed with cancer when my life was going well. And there have been times that I've felt worried and sad about my hopes and plans being disrupted. I even had to miss my daughter's graduation because of how I was feeling from chemo. But I need to remember that I've faced plenty of crises, which haven't prevented me from having a good life and have prepared me for this time. My treatment is going well, and I have access to all of my usual strengths. So I'm looking forward to discovering the new future the next phase of my life will reveal. Okay? So I wish I could see everyone, but I wonder how that lands with you. Oh, and so here it is in writing. So note a couple of things. We are fully acknowledging the evidence on both sides. This is not some kind of Pollyanna, think positively kind of affirmation, is it? We're fully facing the part that doesn't feel good and the truth behind it as well. We're not pulling any punches here. We're acknowledging that, yeah, there's times I don't feel good. I'm not liking this. I'm not liking it physically. I'm not liking its impact on my life. That's true. And these other things are also true. Okay. So what we're not denying anything. Last thing we want to do is do that. We're coming into a closer contact with the real situation so that we can now have access to that higher order brain and decide, what are we going to do from here? And that's where the end of this statement comes in. Okay, given this and this, what do I want for myself? What do I know to be true? So every part of this is true, is the important takeaway here. Also, I've highlighted the word felt. And just as an aside, shoot, there we go. Another hack here, it's really important to pay attention how we language our feelings to ourselves. I'm sad, I'm worried, I'm angry. That phrasing identifies it ties us to the emotion in a way that sort of identifies us with it, that we sort of become the emotion. I am sad. I'm the embodiment of sadness, right? As opposed to, oh, here I am, and there's a feeling that's arising in this present moment for me, and I'm identifying it as sadness. Okay, that's true. And you know what? Since everything changes, there's nothing we can do about that. Everything changes, so the sadness is just the way it feels right now, and not necessarily how it's going to feel in the next moment. And eventually it won't feel that way. It can't, because everything changes, right? So we're just coming into a more realistic and compassionate, way of holding ourselves in difficult times. Excuse me. So with that greater sense of groundedness then, and a little, hopefully some soothed anxiety, then we can move into step 2. Where do I go from here? And so the subtitle here on this slide is to learn something while you're down there. So remember the graph I had of the ups and downs and like when you really hit what feels like a bottom? Well, when bleepity bleep gets real, okay, you're closer than ever to what makes you tick and what has always made you tick. Okay, if you think of sort of the fundamental foundation of who you are as being at the core, then literally when you're sort of feeling low, that's when we say bleepity bleep gets real, right? There's a reason why we say that, because we sort of sense that this is true, that we come into a greater sense of clarity about what's important to us. And it's true, right? Because a lot of remember the pieces that don't matter so much, they seem less important, they fall away. And what's left, we can tune into and take advantage of this window into what really energizes us and inspires us and gratifies us, fulfills us. Importantly, those things are intrinsic motivators. This is what we need to look for at this time. So what are intrinsic motivators? Well, they're invisible. They're things like values, qualities, feelings, states of being, things that when you have them, but I might not necessarily know whether you have them or not. I might be able to guess by looking at you whether you're there or not, but for sure. So they're subjective, okay? You own them, and you own your experience of them, and you're the sole judge of whether you have them or not. So they're intangible, they're invisible, they're subjective, and they are your compass points, because these tend to last your entire lifespan. Some of them are there from your earliest memory. Some sort of emerge as you develop into an adult and move through life. I have yet to find someone, after many years of doing this work, and really, like, this comes straight out of the research literature, and I've sort of developed this approach over several years of working really in depth with this literature. I have yet to work with a person whose compass points change. Okay, these are sort of hardwired into us, things that really matter to us. And so I'm going to give you some questions to ponder to help you arrive at what some of your own compass points, what your own intrinsic motivators might be. Oh, and so some of these questions are in black text, others are in blue. So the blue questions are the ones in particular that are helping us drop down into that intrinsic level. So, and I should say, intrinsic as opposed to extrinsic. So extrinsic things are tangible, concrete. We're conditioned to think of our goals and motivators in concrete, tangible, extrinsic terms. Turn on the TV and you'll receive a barrage of messaging about how this tube of toothpaste, will make you happy, or this car, or this shirt, or whatever, right? We're not conditioned so much to identify the myriad intrinsic motivators that we have that really gratify us in a long-term way, rather than this fleeting blip of short-term gratification that is being sold to us everywhere we turn. Okay, so here's some questions. Oh, and by the way, at the end of this, I'm going to, for people who would like to sign up for my email list, I'm going to offer to have you give you the downloads of these slides. So if you don't feel like you need to write down all these questions, if you don't want to, you can download the slides at the end if you'd like. So what 3 accomplishments am I most proud of? Okay, so start there. And then the blue question to drop one layer below is, what qualities of mine made those accomplishments possible? When have I been happiest and most at ease during my treatment journey so far? And what capacities of mine are being exercised in those moments? So capacity or strength, some ability, okay, that might be invisible too, right? It might not be a tangible skill. So just let these questions, marinate with these questions, okay? What capacities of mine are being exercised in those moments? What aspect of my life has run its course? And what value will I honor by leaving that behind as I move forward? If I could feel twice as much of one feeling by the end of the year, what would it be? I'd love to just leave some space to really let these sink in right now, but I realize I'm being long-winded, so I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. Okay, but like I said, for people that want to sign up for my email list, they'll get these at the end if you'd like. So the next step, the third of 3, is creating a future. Okay, so now we've become more grounded, more soothed, more at ease, better able to ask these questions of ourselves. Now we've got some compass points. Okay, now what? Well, we're going to take this insight and chart a new path forward. So for your midterm objectives, here's some questions to ask. What would need to happen for me to feel more gratified in those areas that you just identified as compass points? Okay. How might other people be able to tell I was making progress? So now these are visible. These are visible and tangible, but they're kind of general. So think of these as categories, maybe categories of actions that you might take. Because for your short-term goals, that's when we're going to get super specific. These should be concrete and tangible and really short-term and specific. What can I do this week in alignment with these compass points? What step could I take in those directions that would feel a little bit difficult right now? So the method to the madness here, let me summarize in this graphic. So what I suggest is that you reassess those intangible, intrinsic motivations quarterly to refresh your memory on those, see if there's any others that are popping to the surface. Monthly, take a look at those midterm objectives that are general categories. And weekly, like maybe on a Sunday night before the week begins, whatever time is best for you, revisit what your specific short-term goals are for that week that tie to the monthly midterm objectives, and most importantly, to those long-term compass points. So here's a quick example of how this might work in reality. I'll call this person Jennifer. So when we were working together, she identified having a voice as both, so not having a voice is what she identified as something that had run its course in her life. And when she felt most at ease was when she was journaling, okay? And she dropped below that and said, okay, what is it about journaling that's gratifying? Oh, it's because I'm able to have a voice when I'm doing that. Okay, so now we have this compass point, okay? So what would be a general kind of category of manifesting that in her daily reality? Well, first she came up with being more communicative with her husband. So, okay, so we coached her up on some strategic, healthy communication skills that allowed her to communicate and be assertive in a healthy way and be heard, and sort of increase the odds of her being heard. So that worked. Her husband was a good partner in this, and he was really interested in mutual communication because he also felt that he wasn't really being understood as well. So they both, really dived into this work and started communicating really well. And it actually was pretty easy for her and for them. So then the next step was, okay, so we've achieved that midterm objective. What next? She started thinking, well, there's this lingering resentment I have toward the relationship I had with my father, where he had left at an early age, for her, and there were things left unsaid. And so she said, I might want to take care of unfinished business with my father. Well, she didn't even know where he was. Okay, so the specific short-term goal was to find him. So she, looked him up, did a little internet sleuthing. It took more than a week, but this was her short-term goal for a while. And then once finding him, she said, okay, I'm going to approach him. So she reached out to him and reestablished a relationship with him tentatively at first, for the first time in 30, 40 years. And he was open to it and receptive to it. Long story short, she ended up taking a cross-country journey by train. I'm changing some of the details here, to reunite in person with her father. And it opened up a whole new avenue of connection in her life that she had, previously hadn't even considered as being open. And so this kind of goes back to that graph I was sharing earlier, that from where you are, you can't really see where you might end up if you just start orienting toward the things that really matter to you, and then back into what's my next step from there. Okay, and allowing the pieces to form around those compass points, as opposed to what we typically do, which is we get so caught up in the details of our lives and think of them as fixed, the circumstances as being fixed, and then having to contort ourselves into trying to squeeze into them as best we can. We're flipping that on its head. And as I mentioned, this is all sort of grounded in the latest motivational research. If there's one thing that we know for certain, that is as much a theory as gravity is a theory. It's that your long-term sights need to be set on intangible, subjective goals if you want to be happy. Like, it's been shown in study after study after study. The place for the short-term concrete ones is the short term, but it's the long-term intangibles that give you a sense of purpose and meaning that really sets you free to move towards self-actualization. So I did have another example here of Frank, but I don't think we have time for it because I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions. So let me just jump to some takeaways here, some key points. The 6 things that I would love for you to remember, if you don't remember anything else, is that you're a whole person. So you're not just a resilient person. You're not just a person who seeks growth. You're not just a person who feels bad sometimes or hopeful sometimes. You're all of it. You're a whole person that has all these different parts, and every single part and every single thought and behavior is there for a good reason. And that reason has something to do with helping you to feel better. So there's no part of you that's working against you, even when it feels so much like there is. So you can trust that you're whole and that you're good and aligned with your long-term, that you're aligned with your well-being through and through. The question is short or long-term well-being. So, and really the crux then of what we're getting at is that it's your relationship to the adversity, not the adversity itself, that makes all the difference. The meaning you ascribe to it and the benefit that you can derive from it. That it's possible to make friends with change and soothe the feelings of threat and distress that come up with it. That you cannot assume that your thoughts are trustworthy because unfortunately our minds, our brains tell us untruthful things all the time. Again, for good reason, not to try to harm us, to try to help us. But we end up shooting ourselves in the foot if we take all of our thoughts at face value. Keep your long-term goals blurry. Compass points are out there on the horizon. You'll never get there. You don't want to get there. You want them to be eternal sources of inspiration and gratification that fuel you in the brightest days and the darkest days, okay? You never get to the horizon. That's what your long-term goals should be. Keep your short-term goals sharp and in focus. And if you ever feel lost, all you have to do is just check your compass and orient toward one of those compass points, and then do something that feels a little bit difficult, okay? Do the next slightly difficult thing, and you're probably headed in the right direction. So that's what I have for you today, and I'll open it up to questions, and I'll leave it on this slide. So in case you'd like to stay in touch, here's my 2 websites. The first one is my coaching website, and that's the one with my blog and videos and everything. It's like there's a lot more on that one. This one here is my therapy site. Here's social. And then if you would like the slides, you can go to this website here and just enter your email address, and it'll direct you to the download page for those. Okay. So let me see if there's any questions. Yeah. Okay. So I've got a question about intangibles. So generally, maybe I can go back. Actually, since we have a little time, I can show you this other example I had. Okay, that'll help answer your question too. So these intrinsic motivators, these intangibles, are things like values, qualities that you enjoy manifesting yourself, or qualities that maybe you admire in other people. Because the qualities we admire in others tend to reflect the things that we value or strive to achieve for ourselves. So you can find them that way too. But so this person I'm calling Frank, he identified creativity, okay, as an intangible. So creativity, I can see if you're painting or drawing or something, I can say, oh, it looks like she's doing something creative. But only you know if you're feeling creative and if you're tapping into what is creativity for you, right? So it's something that's defined and experienced only by you. So creativity. Thought, well, okay, how can he start, doing more creative things? What's a general way you could do that? Well, I'm going to write more, is what he thought. So he started journaling. And he liked journaling and he found it cathartic. He found that it helped ease his anxiety, helped him feel happy. But he also felt that it was a little insular, that he felt a little more cut off from people than he would prefer. So this was one, experiment that he tried. And then we tried, okay, let's see what happens if we look at another compass point. Okay, being of service is something that he found helpful and gratifying. Okay, what's a way you could do that? Volunteer. So he volunteered for a warm line. It's like a crisis line for older adults, and he found that super rewarding. But then he thought, well, I wonder if I could tie this somehow, tie all this together. Is there some way I could be creative and be of service, and maybe bring in the cancer journey as well? And so he thought, okay, I'm going to go back to writing. I'm going to start a blog. So he started now journaling, but publicly, and offering his reflections on his own treatment journey and sharing some wisdom that he was accumulating from professionals and other friends and other people he had met along the way, sharing that on there too, and really helping people, getting a lot of positive comments on the blog, getting that positive feedback of knowing that he was doing something helpful for others. He was hitting all the marks, all at once. And so now he's toying with the idea of writing a memoir. You'd asked him, a few years back, if any of this would have happened. You would have no idea, right? So it's sort of working on, just like we work on a relationship with others in a relationship like a couple or a family. What we're talking about here is working on your relationship to adversity, working on your relationship to events. And just as we can appreciate the qualities of others that we admire, we can look at an event and look at ourselves and see, like, what's being exposed here, right, by this shakeup. What are things that only I know that I can feel, that I know gratify me? So things like, justice, fairness, connection, competence. I mean, I'm just listing off random ones that I see come up a lot in my work with people. But if it's invisible and it's something that you can tell when you have it and other people could only guess, then you're probably on the right track. So I hope that is helpful for you. Let's see. Yeah. So the download, if you if you go to that website, let me go back to that slide. Then you can go there and just involves entering your email address and clicking the button. Okay, right there, down here. And let's see, someone's asking about the steps of clearing the dust. Yeah, so it is first identifying the dust. So ideally practicing some mindfulness meditation so you can be grounded enough to notice it rather than just having the thought and being swept away by it. So that's where mindfulness can really be helpful. So then you identify it, you quote it directly, okay? And then you look at the evidence that supports it and the evidence that refutes it. So it's kind of like you're putting it on trial. So first you play the prosecution, then you play the defense, and then you play the judge. You say, okay, so given this evidence and this evidence, here's my ruling. Okay, and then you write that out. You write that process out. Okay, so hopefully that helps, makes some sense. So someone's asking, would reduction of anxiety be a compass point? That's a good question. That's a good question, because some of these can be a little bit of a gray area. So here, the way to think about this is if it's something visible or tangible or an action that you might take, then that would sort of fall into the extrinsic category. And if it's a feeling or a quality or something invisible or a value, something like that, then that would be intrinsic. So reduction of anxiety, that's a great question, because it's a tricky one. I would say that peace of mind or ease, would be an intrinsic motivator. So what you want all of these things to be sort of an affirmative statement. So you want these intrinsic goals to be stated affirmatively. It's this that I want. It's not having X, right? It's having Y, if you get that distinction. So we want to look directly at what it is we want, rather than saying, I don't want that and I don't want that. So maybe if it's true for you, maybe ease or peace of mind might be the intrinsic that you're looking for. And then an extrinsic way that you might pursue that as a midterm objective, a general category, might be reduction of anxiety. So, okay, I'd like to work on reducing my anxiety in service of my long-term ease and peace of mind. Okay, so that backing into reduction of anxiety. And then the short-term goal be, okay, what am I going to do this week specifically to help reduce my anxiety? So maybe it's meditating every day for a week, or maybe it's going for a walk every day, getting some physical exercise in, because we know that helps with anxiety. You see, so we're going from vague and abstract to concrete and general to concrete and specific. Yeah. So hopefully that helps. That clears it up for you. Any more questions, anybody? I think we've gotten through most of them. Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, then I think I actually, for once in my life, I finished on time. So.
Thank you so much for being here with us, Jim. This was absolutely wonderful. So, thank you so much, Jim.
Thanks for having me, Larissa. I appreciate it.